work of art is the trace of a magnificent struggle. Robert Henry, teacher and American artist. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. John P. Lasater IV is a representational painter whose works are a synthesis of nature, perception, and deep roots in art history. And by deep roots, I mean he's not fixated on the 19th century triumvirate of Sargent, Sorolla, and Zorn. By not limiting himself to the influence and lessons of just a few 19th century representational artists, John's approach to painting is broadened and enriched. For several years, John worked for a greeting card company. The deadline-driven environment and the constant flow of different projects certainly contributed positively to John's skill as an artist. However, John yearned for the freedom to paint what he wanted and to become a full-time painter. He was uncertain about taking such a leap. However, a close friend of his helped him be decisive, set his priorities, and clarify his focus. With the support of his wife and family, he dove into painting full-time. John is a person who actively seeks out challenges in growing as a painter. At first, painting outdoors was a significant part of John's career as a painter. Now he spends more time in his studio working on even more challenging and ambitious paintings. A close look at his paintings show that over time, John's work has evolved from his early impressionistic bravado brushwork to, more recently, a quieter, more thoughtful, simpler approach. John is not content to simply paint. He has a burning desire to share the lessons he's learned as a painter. It's therefore no surprise then that he considers himself more of a teacher than an artist. He thoroughly enjoys helping others take on the challenge of growing as artists. Clearly, whether he is teaching or painting, John Lasater is a man who is always aiming for something higher. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. John, I'm so happy to have you on The Artful Painter today. It's a real pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Carl. I feel the same way. This is great. I love talking about art.
As I browsed your art gallery, you have a range of years there. So you have your newer paintings and some of your older paintings. And what I noticed is there appears to be a gradual change in the appearance of your paintings. That's not to say that they were bad in the beginning. They weren't. They were good. But there seems to be a difference. It seems to indicate growth as an artist. And I'd like to know what prompted that growth as an artist in you.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. I don't know, maybe I just place a high value on not being consistent, but being consistently better. So I work at, I don't know, there's a feeling every time I paint that I'm going to make some great leap in understanding, possibly. And so I've noticed that makes me different somewhat, because some artists would put more value on finding their voice and being consistent with their voice. I place more value on, like, maybe I've got a goal to become great, you know, and not to say that those that work on consistency aren't great. It's just that maybe I'm searching for that one painting that might really impact the world, you know, something like that. And so that motivates me then on every piece to feel like I can just scratch what I know somewhat and aim for something higher, perhaps. Like I guess I believe in that there's higher understanding, higher ideals, and I can aim a little higher every time, even at the expense of what I know. So I don't know. It's just something that motivates me, and that causes me then to almost dislike the things of the past. You know, like I look at those paintings from that initial period you're talking about. I think it was through 2016 or something. That there was I was somewhat consistent during those years. Like I would most of those paintings came from plein air events, probably because that's what motivated me to paint, was to go to these competitions. And there I focused on just a spontaneous response to nature, and found that I had some skill in replicating it, but also having the emotional brushstroke and that kind of thing. And that gathered a certain audience to me, that of patrons and followers. I just feel like for my particular personality, I came to a natural end for that. Like, it was just like I hit a wall. I just kind of came to a spot where I said, I have nothing further to learn going in this direction, I don't think.
So is learning part of the motivation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, I think so. It's like, I look at historical books and biographies, and I dig into them because I feel like I can only go so far with today's knowledge, with the people I could interact with today. And that's probably incorrect in some aspects, but it does seem like that if I could choose any teacher out of history, it wouldn't be someone that's living today.
Really? So who would it be?
Well, no, there is no one teacher, but I love Whistler. I love his writing, and I've been able to find some great writings of his. He speaks about art in a way that you can see that he gives proper homage to history as well. So a teacher that doesn't say, here's how I do it, here's the best way to get from point A to point B. It's a teacher that says, look at this painter, that painter from history, and you'll find possibly clues to growth. A teacher that talks in those terms is one that I can follow, because it just seems like there's such a depth of knowledge that's come through history, and I don't know. It feeds me to think of it in those terms. And so, like Whistler spoke that way when he would speak about art. He hardly ever say, "Here's the way I do it. You should do it this way." It was always pointing at someone else, and he was pointing at Japanese printmakers and Velázquez and El Greco, and these are the artists that influenced him, and Rembrandt, the etchings of Rembrandt. And so that made me want to look up those names. And so a teacher that opens up at like a deep well of historical knowledge is a great teacher, So I don't know, he's one. And then I could point out several.
Did you start with Whistler? Was that the first that you investigated, or is that one that you, as you went through your education, your learning, he really resonated with you, and then that led to a cascade of other people to learn from?
Well, I investigated the usual suspects that come up when you go to the American workshops. Sargent, Sorolla, Zorn. You hear these names and you think, well, they must have been the best painters that ever lived. Well, why are they all in the late 19th century? And I felt gypped, I think, at some point. I just started to say, that can't be the only. I mean, they're all perfectionists. Nobody today has matched their ability. See, they didn't study themselves to get to where they were. They studied names that you don't hear about. Think about that.
Who were their teachers? Who were their influences?
Well, Velázquez is consistently one of their influences. But I mean, I know that they were looking at Renaissance artists, like Raphael. And why wouldn't we look at Raphael? You look at Raphael and you go, well, he's not as perfect looking as Sargent. Or then you can throw out some names of today, because there are a lot of perfect, I'm doing quote marks, perfect painters that, but they were, how could somebody like a Sargent have looked at Raphael and gotten anything out of that? Because Raphael couldn't paint a face just right.
Interesting.
Right. I mean, it had this kind of mythological look to his work, or like Raphael probably had an ideal, and a lot of the Italian artists had an ideal that they aimed for. And they also had humanness to their work. And so I guarantee you that a Sargent would have looked at a Raphael and said that he might have even, like, I don't know, like Sargent might have loathed his own skill at drawing and said, why can't I just loosen up and be kind of paint out of my head a little more? I guarantee you there was some of that in him. And so, I don't know. I think they looked at like that. I know that Sargent loved the Impressionists. I don't know what else exactly, because I've not really studied him to the nth degree, but I did study those teachers first. And then I'm discovering all these people outside of them that can really influence me, and like even more modern artists like Hopper. And I don't know, just, it's nice to surround yourself with artists that don't paint like your ideal.
I like that. See, I enjoy looking and studying art as being relatively new at this, having a newfound interest. My fifth grade art teacher would be absolutely astounded at me today. I was probably one of the worst students that she could have, because, I was very left brain nerdy and that sort of thing. So art didn't appeal to me as a kid, but I remember her lessons. She was very passionate about it. And I remember walking in the Albertine in Vienna and seeing a Paul Klee. And as soon as I saw it, I said, Mrs. Pfeiffer, she talked about Paul Klee, and she tried to get us to appreciate these artists, and I just wouldn't listen. But I guess I was listening subconsciously, because that was the first thing I thought of when I saw that painting was Michelle Pfeiffer, my art teacher in the fifth grade.
Oh, that's cool. That's great. Yeah. You knew. Sometimes it's fun to know what artists people admire, because it helps you to learn to appreciate them too. Like you think, well, on the surface, I don't really look at a Paul Klee and love it, but because my teacher that I loved so much did, maybe there's some value to Paul Klee. And then you look at a Paul Klee a little differently, don't you? It changes the way you look at it. And then you always say that name with a little bit of reverence that you didn't have before.
That's a good way to put it.
So that's why it's good to move beyond your ideal. That's what I mean,
Yeah. That's a very good point. I appreciate other artists who do that. I've been following Phil Stark and Gabor Savrik. They really have a passion for discovering artists that we don't know, that are not on the tip of our tongue. And good. I appreciate how they share them with us in their blog posts and their Facebook posts and things like that. Because I was exchanging emails with Gabor Savrik, and he mentioned an artist, and I said, I've never even heard of him. Of course, now I couldn't tell you it is because I'm doing this show, and my brain just went. But I have it written down. I'm going to go investigate it. I haven't done it yet, but I like that because I don't know. I want to see what they do, and I want to see them in other mediums as well. I like oil painting, but I appreciate too the watercolorists and gouache and all the different mediums that people have used in the past and are using today.
Yeah, you get a lot out of changing mediums and trying things. Definitely.
So would you say your growth as an artist, was that a conscious decision, or was it a natural result of your investigations into other artists?
No, it was all very natural. I sort of I don't think I let anybody influence me. I just sort of naturally flowed into what my compulsion has been. And that's part of like getting out of a job, getting out of the rat race about 10 years ago. There's a cleansing that sort of happens to you where you're usually having to be in service to someone, to now needing to serve your own desire somewhat, like a compulsion that might, and some of us believe that comes from another source other than ourselves. And I kind of pray into those things. I ask God to not let me veer too far off, whatever path he has me on. And I really feel like he motivated me leaving the full-time job. And so I'm really trying to like learn to follow compulsion and to trust it. And so from 10 years ago, I just threw myself into what direction I thought was best. And then it's really the flow since then has been very natural.
What were you doing before you pursued being a full-time painter?
I was a greeting card designer. And they had actually moved me into more of a management position. And I'm a maker. At my heart, I'm a maker. And so that just, and I had actually been building up to leaving anyway. So when they made that switch, it was like, okay, this is the beginning of the end. I did my best at management, for the 8 months that I did it, but that was my background, and I probably worked in that arena for about 10 years.
Did you benefit from it artistically?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. I can tell you 3 or 4 ways that lent themselves to paintings very quickly. First of all, I developed a very wide art appreciation because I worked with illustrators and also searched databases of illustration and art and fine art.
Were there any particular illustrators that stood out in your mind at that time?
Well, I'll make a plug for one of your former interviewees. Patrick Saunders was one of the illustrators that was in the Hallmark database that I went through.
Oh, wow.
And I'll never forget that name because I remember coming upon his work and just going through it and saying, man, I really like this. They were illustrations. They weren't not very much like what he does now, but there were probably some floral illustrations that are similar. I wouldn't say there's any names that you would know. It was more like...
So it was illustrators that were internal to the company that you work for. Yeah.
And some external, but they weren't big names. I don't even know who they were, to be honest. So that was one way. Another was just another way that working at Hallmark prepared me for painting was daily ideas. And the nice thing about greeting cards is they were over and gone in one day, So you would receive some editorial to put on a greeting card. And then you had to think through what kind of image goes well with this and what kind of color palette do I use and what trend is going on right now that would really lend itself to this. And you throw it all in the mixing bowl and come out with a card at the end of the day, pretty much. And doing that every day for 10 years.
Did they give you parameters to work within?
No, because, well, somewhat. Yeah, somewhat. There would be like trend boards that we would look at. But because the editorial was so specific, sometimes the design had to be super specific too. And so there was no one giving direction on the front end of each individual card.
But you had to be quick on your toes with ideation. So that's a good lesson. And you said there was one more lesson from working there? I
would say like color and design layout, 2 more things. Even though working in Photoshop or any kind of design program, is you're not mixing literal paint. You are thinking about the primaries of printing, CMYK, and how that's going to look and how to keep your color clean in places and how to let it be gray in other places. And, so all that is part of it. And then just laying out things on a rectangular shaped card and then switching from that to a 16 by 20 canvas. Very similar kind of thought process.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? You were at that point where you were working digitally, but the results had to be analog. So there were things that you had to think about to make the analog work. When it hit the presses, it had to work. Mm-hmm. That vision had to come alive. Mm-hmm. I didn't have much pre-press. I had some pre-press experience, but not enough to be a real expert. But it was fascinating. I loved the nuts and bolts of it, but I was kind of a left brainer back in those days. So,
yeah. Well, you need some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a technical side to art. There's no doubt about it. So,
well, nice. But you made the leap. You left that company and you jumped in painting full time. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And I'll never regret it. Never regret it at all. I mean, it's just been so great. Yeah. Just to be able to throw myself into, another problem with corporate America, even in graphic design, is that you really have to juggle multiple things and they overlap one another. And so the mind doesn't work very well that way. Like the mind is better at focusing. And so learning to multitask it's a stretch of the mind that's actually kind of dangerous to the mind. It's a skill you can exhibit, but it's not good for you. And so to be able to focus and become great at one thing, or try to become great at one thing, just being able to try is really been good.
Well, I think that applies even today with if you're doing an oil painting, a watercolor, or any other task, you have to drop into a zone of concentration. And I don't handle interruptions very well.
Mm.
I interrupt people a lot. I do that well, unfortunately, but I don't handle it well myself. Even especially when I was software engineer, writing software, I could not handle an interruption. And it was a hard concept to get across to the people that were working for me, the people I worked for, my family. Once I went into that, please do not interrupt me, because it will destroy this fragile collection of images and code and diagrams that are all hanging in my head. I've got to put them down.
Yeah. And you're tapping into subconscious processes when you're doing that too. It's same with painting. I every once in a while, my wife will come up into the studio when I'm in the middle of a painting, and she never knows which John she's going to run into, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
And it reminds me of The Shining. There was one scene in The Shining that I just went, oh, I'm never going to forget this, because it reminds me of that moment when someone interrupts me. Yeah, he's Jack Nicholson is working on his story, I guess, but he's out in the middle of this giant ballroom or something, and his wife comes in and she sits down. She goes, well, today was pretty slow, and I was working in the kitchen, and Tommy was riding his bike through the hallway, and whatever. And she starts talking about the day, and you could just see his face like getting more and more like shriveled and angry, and like he just explodes. He goes, "Oh, really?" And it just reminds me so much of the way I'm feeling on the inside when that happens. But
yeah,
she knows. She knows like. You can see that face, and she just walks right out and says, I'll talk to you later.
or as my wife says, she loves me anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My wife is being just respectful of that. She knows that I have to go into my subconscious.
Yeah. Well.
Oh my gosh.
Oh boy, we're in trouble now, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely.
What are you drawn to paint?
I think I'm a lot more excited about the formal aspects of painting and the orchestration on the canvas, and the division of the canvas, and the color orchestration, and pushing the envelope maybe with design. And honestly, I guess subject is not the primary thing for me. So I'm different in that way too. Something in me just prefers that. So I think the landscape was my muse for about 8 years or so, something like that. And in one of my blog posts, I talk about the moment that happened for me, because I could juggle all these different subjects, and I didn't have a focus. And a friend helped me to focus. He really kind of put it to me and said, "You have to decide."
How did he do that?
There was a moment on his porch where he put out all these pebbles on a table, and he said, each one of these pebbles is a skill that you have, and it could be painting or not, or it could be different kinds of painting, genres of painting. And he said, I just want you to put them in order, line them up in front of this cup, and line them up in the order of what you want to do today. So that's all it was. And I lined them up, and he said, now you think you've accomplished something, but you haven't yet. He said, I want you to take that first pebble, the one that's closest to the cup, lift it up, drop it in the cup. I did that. It made a clinking sound.
What did that first pebble represent?
At the time, it was plein air painting.
Okay. So that's in the cup.
Yeah, it was in the cup. And I went, oh my gosh. And so he talked me through, what does this mean? And I said, well, I want that to be my pebble, but I have to provide for my family, and just this idea of traveling and spending money on travel going to plein air events. I don't see how that could be the thing, for me. But that's what I want to do. And he said, well, how else are you going to be able to travel without, asking permission from your family and just planning it? And I said, that's right. That's what I got to do. So I went home and immediately looked through the calendar of events and just chose the ones I wanted to go to and asked permission from my family. And they were like, well, that sounds like a lot of travel, but go ahead. So I did. And that's sort of what started me down that path. And there was so much to learn about landscape. To that point, landscape had been my biggest disappointment. I was better at drawing a face or better at drawing a still life or something like that than I was at finding anything in the landscape that was worthy of a painting.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
Yeah, I mean, I would go out there with these ideals of what the landscape should look like because I'd seen a few landscape paintings, but I didn't know how to make that into art because I'd get out there and I'd try to just take a field and a couple of trees and make something of it. And I don't know, I just couldn't because I relied too much on what I was looking at. And I didn't really know yet, what those elements were and how to really arrange them in a way. So I don't know, that was my biggest challenge. And yet that is what I wanted to do the most. I guess that just means I like challenges. And so subject wise, it was landscape for a long time and I still love the landscape, but it began to become boring to me, not because I had achieved anything great. It was just, I was now boring. And now I'm ready to go back to the figure and portrait and see what that's like. So for the last year, I've been focused on that.
You did a video. You have a video trailer. It's about your painting, this beautiful painting called Old School. And it really struck a chord with me because, I live in green, Georgia. And I have struggled to come to grips with seeing something that inspires me to paint here in Georgia. I mean, I really do. It's been a struggle. I wanted to paint the big mountains and the beautiful deserts and the red rocks and the ocean and things that are sublime. And so, I'm looking very grandiose at things. And I've had trouble adjusting my attitude, but I've seen people do it.
Yes.
Phil Stark, I mentioned him earlier. He moved from Arizona to Georgia. So he's not too far from where I live.
Really?
About an hour away.
I didn't know he left Tucson, huh?
He did. And here's the thing. He is so excited about painting Georgia.
Wow.
And I said, what?
That's cool.
I'm amazed at his enthusiasm, and I want to learn that enthusiasm of painting green Georgia. I do, because I can't really travel anytime I want to. It's not practical. It's not affordable.
Yeah.
I've got to learn to paint what's here.
The only reason that I would ever have chosen to paint where I live here in the Arkansas region, which looks a lot like Georgia, I mean, just green with some hills. And you have bigger trees than we do, taller. They grow taller in Georgia, I noticed. But I don't know, just I ran into quotes, reading Hawthorne on painting, and honestly, just about every book I've read, the great artists have told us, go for the ordinary things. Don't just assume that mountains is going to make your painting better. Just because you put a mountain in it isn't, a great painter is going to be recognized as a great painter if they just make anything great, the ordinary things. So what maybe you're expressing is that Georgia isn't very motivating, and you do need to be motivated. So maybe you need to get those. It's because
I've lived here since I was 3 years old. So, it's
okay.
You take it for granted after a point. You can't. It's hard to perceive that which other people like Phil Stark sees in Georgia. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to do that.
Well, I think there was a movie made about Olympic athletes. Maybe it was the first year that the United States had joined the Olympics in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And it was funny because they trained naked just to relate with the old, the Greeks and silly things like that. And I remember they had the wrong weight on their shot put. It was too heavy, but they trained with the heavier shot put. And when they got to the actual games, the lighter weight shot put was a cinch to them, and they beat everyone. They won, they won the shot put competition easily, like by great lengths. And so I don't know, maybe training and the things that you're used to looking at that aren't so motivating makes going to those places like Colorado and the American West, more like you're a better painter already. And so when you get into those environments and you're like, oh, this is so beautiful, you'll have your own challenges. There are challenges with every new kind of landscape and motif, but you can get there quicker, because you've trained on those things that are around you and that you see every day. So I don't know if that's motivating or not, but
it is.
I'll tell you one story. Like when I was, this was soon after my friend did that exercise with me, and I was able to decide that I wanted to be a plein air painter. I had mostly just painted scenes around my house. I still hadn't painted from photography. I was just painting from life, and that's what I had. That's what I had around me. So I got into my first national event, and it was kind of like a mid-level event. It was called Plein Air Rockies. This was in 2012. I was there with my buddy, Jason Sacron, and it's a 2-week event, which is awesome. I mean, it just gives you all the time in the world to get out there. And
you get to be immersed. Yeah.
Yep. So we were there for a full 2 weeks.
Where was it?
In Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park.
Oh, man. Yeah. See, that's what I'm talking about. The sublime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. Yes, I understand. And to me, that was heaven, because I grew up in Texas, and all Texans think Colorado is heaven. I spent 2 weeks painting and going through that frustration of how do I translate. How do I take that training in greens and in all these, these great upright trees and green fields, and now apply it to, desert grasses and very dark trees that are sparse, and these, the substance of rock and dirt going back into the distance. And there was nothing easy about it. I would say for the first week, I just painted terrible paintings because I didn't know how to translate those colors. So there's an understanding it takes to get over some of those things. Of course, I was a young painter at the time too, but
well, how did you get past that frustration? You must have felt frustrated after doing that for a week.
I was pretty frustrated because what I was looking at was amazing, and what I was putting on the canvas was terrible. So. And I had a lot of paintings like that. And I had also been intimidated because the artists that were in that event knew Colorado well, and they knew how to paint it really well. And so, I was pretty scared. I had one moment though, where I went up on a hillside, and it was a sunset, and I'd painted sunsets before, so I kind of knew how to do that. Of course, all the mountains then were backlit as I was looking towards the sun. And so I had these great flat shapes. And then I had this winding river going off into the distance that was catching the light as it wound back and forth across the valley floor. And I just went, ooh, and I threw a painting together in about 45 minutes. And then a storm came up, and I had to run down the hill and jump into the car right as the rain fell. Well, that painting at the end, I was like, I pulled it out of the box, and I hadn't looked at it again since that moment. And I didn't think much of it, but Jason and another friend came up and said, wow, that's great. You got to put that in the show. So I chose it as one of the 3 I put in the show, and it won Best of Show and Artist Choice. And I couldn't believe it. It's just
wow.
Oh my gosh. And the other paintings were just miserable. Like one of them was a nocturne, and those are easy to do in Colorado. There's nothing about the landscape that influenced the nocturne, but so I did what I could, but I couldn't believe that. Man, that was a great moment, but I did. It was undeserved.
Aren't you glad you pushed through?
It was undeserved. I was so bad at painting mountains, but I've been back so many times that I've kind of overcome that challenge. And
yeah,
it's nice to add those things to your lexicon like an oceanscapes or something that I still haven't quite conquered, but I've been to a lot of those events.
Well, when I look at your gallery, there's some of the things you truly do seem to embrace, I hate to use the word the mundane, but the common, the fancy art term would be prosaic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to look up what that even meant when I heard it for the first time. but the prosaic, right there, will sound hoity-toity there. But there's one painting, for example, I'm looking at right now. It's called Upper Level. I would have never thought to paint this painting, but yet it's quite beautiful. And yet, if you were to walk by it, I don't know that most people would say, "Oh, that's a beautiful scene of two cars parked and lights coming out of a building." But as a painting, it comes across very beautiful, and not just beautiful, but it's almost suggesting a story that I can insert myself in. I am that person walking by those two cars, and if I walk into that building, what will I see in those rooms where the lights are on?
Well, I mean, there you go. I don't come upon those things because I'm looking for some ideal. I come upon those scenes with formal intentions. So, what's going to make a great design? And so I actually have this great tool now called a 9-bot. It's
called what?
A 9-bot. It's a Segway. Segways?
Yeah.
It's a Segway that's just one wheel, and you stand on either side of it. And you ride around on this one wheel without handlebars or anything.
Get out!
No, I'm serious. And so, this was done at the In Plein Air, Texas event, and it's a great little town for just riding around. There's not a lot of people milling about in downtown there, and so I rode my one wheel all around town. And that scene that you're talking about is one of maybe 5 that I was really excited about because I was going around with my iPhone. And I had it on black and white mode. So I'm looking at everything from just its design and construction and trying to find things that would excite me. Yeah. And it kind of felt like, secondarily there was some story there maybe, It's not a happy scene at all, but it's, I just knew it would, I don't know, something in it has power that I wanted to capture. So. But what's cool is
I have this funny view of you on a one-wheeler going about town. Look, you had to be, I wonder if the adrenaline and the excitement of being on one of those things opens your eyes up in a way that you normally wouldn't.
It turns you into a very, very active observer, almost superhuman. Like it allows you to do what you wouldn't have the patience to do normally.
Wow.
You'll go places you wouldn't go normally. So, and it allows you to see things from the perspective of standing up rather than being in a car.
So you didn't actually do a plein air painting on the spot there. You were catching. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I misunderstood you. Okay. So what did you have with you? I mean, you can't carry a lot on one of those things. So what did you have?
No, that was just in the scouting process. So
gotcha.
Once the event opened, then I went right back to that scene in the evening and set up my gear. And that was actually, it took about 3 nights of work to capture that. Or maybe it was 2. I think it was 2 actually. Nocturnes go a little faster because you can fill in a lot of the space with darker colors and you don't have a whole lot of color choices, a lot more monotone. So that one was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
That's neat. So,
and it's cool because the collector that bought it didn't get it either. Like when he saw it first, he said, well, it's amazing. It feels so real, but why would I buy this? And so the person that bought it had that thought first. And I love it that he ended up buying it because he started going around asking other artists, what do you think of that painting? And some of the artists at the event said that they thought it was special and that he should get it, and so he got that advice from a few other artists. Yeah, that was fun. So I ended up getting it. Yeah.
See, I think that's the fascinating thing about getting the story behind the painting. Uh-huh. It just, that painting stood out in my mind when I was looking at your gallery. I thought, wow, that's different. And I like it. It's not something I would have probably chosen to do, but not because I think it's a bad idea, but it's just, I'm learning I'm learning this process of thinking about things like that. Another artist that does such a wonderful job with this is David Boyd, who lives near me as well. And I mean, he can take an old gas meter and turn it into something worthy of a museum. It just amazes me. I would have never, ever stopped to paint an old gas meter and peeling paint off a siding, and it becomes something beautiful.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing. Artists doesn't have to consider whether something's beautiful. They just get to do their skill and apply it to whatever makes the process of creating it enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I think he found something that engaged that engaged the formal reasons for painting for him. He probably had tried plenty of fields with trees and just something in that was not engaging him in the right ways. You got to enjoy the process. And so an artist needs to look for things that engage the process for them.
Back to that cup with that pebble in it. So the pebble you put in was for plein air. What comes after the pebble? Does the pebble end, or do you move into something different? Do your interests change? Are you project oriented? I'm trying to get an understanding of where you stand on this thing, because I don't see myself, if I lived 1,000 years, would I be a painter 1,000 years from now? Some artists would say yes. I would probably say it would be a relegated skill that I would call on from time to time. So that's me personally. I'm project oriented. What about you?
I guess I'm challenge oriented,
Nice.
Yeah. So to me, that plein air held the greatest opportunity for challenge. And I wanted something that would engage me for possible decades. So, I guess maybe going through that exercise trained me and conditioned me to do that with myself more often and really be able to evaluate what is my desire. But nothing brings it out of you like a friend asking the right question, like, I don't know. I mean, I honestly haven't gone through that exercise in a while. I just maybe so doing that initially, it broke through things in my life, maybe, like I didn't feel permission to live that way. And it's been a stretch for my whole family, and now, for me to travel so much and, in our social circles, that wasn't the acceptable way to live for the dad to be away and the husband to be away so much. And, it was maybe, I say a lot, but it was maybe about a quarter of the year I was gone for some of those years. And that was the worst it ever got. But that's, going away for 2 weeks, being home for 3, being gone for 1 week, being home for 4, that kind of a thing. We had to condition to that. But it was the only way I was going to get to see the world and paint it from life. I don't know, just going through that it probably has released me somewhat to do things that I want to do rather than always thinking empathetically and what other people want me to do. And that's tough because most people are conditioned to only serve the people in their life. And I'm not saying that one is more noble than the other. I'm just saying now I'm conditioned. I actually know what it is I want to do most of the time. But I would say at that moment, when my friend did the pebble exercise with me, there was no way for me to look inside myself and know what I wanted to do.
Well, it also once it crystallized, you had a goal now, so you could work to bring that goal about.
Yeah.
And that would mean adjustments and support from the family. It would mean, taking care of practical things, the need for money and food and shelter. Those things don't go away. But now we figure out, okay, now we have a goal. How do we get to that point? How do we make all these pieces work together? It crystallized it, as it were.
Yeah. There's a philosophy around this, that Ayn Rand, that's interesting to study, because what it tells you is you can't truly be unselfish until you've learned to be selfish. Like, I don't know if that's true, but it's something that I read and I was like, wow, I actually kind of relate with that now, because I've gone in directions that I knew were best for me, and they might have hurt other people. I hope not. It doesn't seem like I'm getting that feedback from my family right now. But even so, shouldn't I go maybe try those directions that, I don't know, just, I think growing up in the church, for me, I was always taught, be unselfish, be unselfish, be unselfish, be unselfish. And so I never really knew what it was I wanted to do. And so, I don't know, maybe going through this process, even though it's not been a perfect process, has allowed me now to kind of say, all right, I've fulfilled a lot of things I wanted to do in life now. And that part of me has calmed down somewhat. And maybe now I can better balance myself. It's good to be aware of what it is you want to do, even if you choose not to do it.
So where I was going with the pebble thing is, to me, I in my mind, it was a discrete thing. It's one thing, but the cup has room for other pebbles in it. So where are your interests moving now? I mean, I'm sure plein air painting and even painting in the studio are still very important to you, but you have other interests to be fulfilled. What are those, and how are you fulfilling those interests?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I wanted to learn to articulate maybe some of the knowledge I was receiving, and every time I paint, when I'm at the easel and I'm putting brush strokes on, man, ideas just hit me, and sometimes really great ideas, and I'm like, ooh, I should blog post about that, and I'll sit down and type then for a few hours and come up with a blog post. And it's you, as you can see from my website, it's pretty rare that I actually post them, because I want it to be something that really, really is genuine, wisdom that I've really gained, not wisdom that I've read and just regurgitated. So I don't know, just this pursuit of understanding what I'm doing so that I can teach it better. I feel like I owe that to people, rather than maybe I'm compensating for not being that great of a demonstrator too, because when I'm at workshops, I'll demonstrate, and then I just feel like the demonstration didn't really do it, because my mind is trying to work on the painting, but it's also trying to speak and answer questions, and I can do it, but the painting always suffers. So it's like, man, this isn't the best way for me to teach. Demonstrating isn't the best way for me to teach. And it's hard to admit, because it's the formula. That's how all the American workshop instructors do it. So I don't know, I've been seeking for the best way. And I went to a summer program in Italy, which I've talked about in other podcasts, so I won't go deeply into that, but I learned from Israel Hirschberg how he views teaching that's best. And he's received teaching from some very deep instructors. And by deep, I mean like they dipped deeply into history, and you can actually trace that lineage. It's not a broken lineage. So he's coming from, just 3 generations back from him were greats like Charles Hawthorne, William Merritt Chase, and those teachers, Robert Henry, they had a very philosophical way of teaching, very articulate way of teaching, and I'm just lacking in that way. I really realized that, so I came away from his instruction, from Hirschberg's instruction, wanting to do the same thing, seeing that now as my next pebble. So I dropped that pebble in the cup, started reading like mad, going to more museums, just anything I could to train my eye to where I could see a painting from history and go, oh, I know who that is, or at least know what the era that came from. I also, read a lot of biographies and just anything I could And so I'm beginning to gain that. And it's like, I'm still pretty new at it. So I'm humble about the whole idea, because it's like, there's people that know it way better than me. But I don't know, maybe I felt like it was lacking. It was missing from our current art culture. And so I wanted to be able to add that to it. And
how do you see that going?
I think it's going great. It's food for the next decade for me. And so I'm trying to find ways to share what I have now, even if it's not that deep of a well yet. One of the great things that Israel Hirschberg would do is he would critique. And that was his main form of teaching. He'd lecture and critique. And how could that be enough? Because aren't we supposed to watch people demonstrating? Isn't that how we learn? Well, it's maybe, but that teaching a 1, 2, 3 step program is really not the way. I think maybe in the beginning you could say, here's a way you could follow. Try this, try toning your canvas. Now try drawing a little bit. Now try filling that in with shapes. Yeah, you can teach that, but I think most people that want to learn have already gotten past that. And there's many of those kind of students out there right now that have gotten that already. They've already seen 5 to 12 to 30 different people demonstrate and explain what they're doing. And a lot of that is actually shared. So a lot of these artists that have learned from the same teacher or teachers. So now what? Now how do I seek out the spirit of art? Like how do you put spirit in your art? What does that mean? One thing that you could really try to satisfy is to have those historical artists showing up in your work. To me, the best compliment an artist could get is, man, you're really skilled. And I also see the influence of, and they throw out 3 different names from history that aren't Sargent, Sorolla, and Zorn. And and I mean, maybe one of them.
And not knocking them, but
well, I was so steeped in Sargent for a lot of years that I'll hear that still sometimes. So I think it's still in my work, but I'm beginning to think geometrically and architecturally like the Renaissance artists, because I'm looking at them a lot. So who you look at, ends up influencing who you paint like. So I don't know. So when I hear that, it's deeply satisfying.
Good.
So I don't know.
You got my curiosity piqued, though, and I know we can't cover everything about it, but how do you put your spirit or put life into a painting? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know.
You're still
really
working
reading,
on that
I'm still kind of reading on that, because I find things and I underline them. And Henry's book is very helpful. Like one of his quotes is, "A work of art is the trace of a magnificent struggle." Who of all of us American artists really believes that? Because when we paint, when we demonstrate, it's a performance. When we struggle, we apologize for it. We say, "Oh man, that was a terrible demonstration." I was just saying it earlier when I would teach workshops. I'm embarrassed of my demonstration. Well, isn't that part of the process? Isn't embarrassment? Isn't scraping things back? Isn't throwing panels away once in a while, or quite often, something to actually wear as a badge of honor? Maybe it is. That's a new way of thinking, and it's not what the student wants to see. They all gasp in horror and disbelief when you do it. I think, didn't Joe Paquette at the Plein Air Convention a couple of years scrape away one of the paintings he was using to demonstrate? I think he did, it was on the stage in front of everyone. Legend says that he scraped it away. I don't know. But
oh, wow. I wasn't there, so I didn't see it.
He's the kind of artist that would do that, though, to show people that paintings don't have to be precious. Anyway, so yeah, to me, that's a big part of spirit, is actually the pentimento, the rethinking of an idea, the struggle of saying, I could do this better, or I'm getting too much into detail now when I really should be thinking about the larger things in the painting. That kind of an approach isn't very inspiring to watch, but it is what being an artist is. And so we don't want to mislead students into thinking it's a performance every time. And, I think for a lot of years, I tried to make it a performance. And it just wore me out. I'm like, this isn't real. I have no intellect going into this piece. It's all emotional garbage to me. Like I'm accepting less when I throw something up there. And so like backing off now and working on a painting several days, maybe even several weeks, it satisfies me way more because I'm making better decisions as I stop and wait and come back to it the next day. And it's intuitive things that I'm putting back into the painting, but they're in the larger scope. They're foundational things that I'm realizing I was making mistakes on the day before. And, so it's kind of I like that process better. It's more me. It's more what I want to get out of this. I want to make paintings that last, and I don't want them to all be studies.
So how will we see this teaching manifest itself? Are you going to offer it as a service? Is it something you're going to do on YouTube? Is it something you're going to do as a book? Or how will it manifest itself?
Yeah. Well, I think that I want to show the world the importance of critique. I want to I want to create some critiques that could apply to anyone, so that's one thing. A book is something that I don't want to put out too soon. I want to constantly be developing a book. So maybe that's a better way of putting it. So
I've got a living document.
Yeah, a living document that is growing with me. And, I find I learn better by doing it a little slower. Like when I read the Art Spirit, I read a page or two and I underline a whole lot of stuff. And I go, this isn't knowledge I gained. He articulated it really well. Some of it is stuff I understand. Some of it is stuff I don't understand yet. But, I just can't go through that book very quickly, and same with Hawthorne on painting. Those are two really great books.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll provide links for people to find them. I think most artists have them in their library. Mm-hmm. Those are the standards, as we might be tempted to call them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I have them in my library, among others. Though I haven't read them all, and I find myself like you. I'm a slow reader. I'm slow intentionally, and I don't read cover to cover. I will read a section at a time, or a paragraph at a time, or I may just look at the pictures.
There aren't many pictures in the Art Spirit, and
no, there's none in there. But that's why. But I do enjoy Man, I just made a fool out of myself there, didn't I? Yeah. There's no pictures in Art Spirit. That's true. You have to form mental pictures.
Yeah.
But
well, and another thing I know I ran. It's all these great just thoughts on art, and it should be an artist's Bible in a sense, like an artist should go through these books over and over, because there's things in there that I noticed that some of my peers and companions haven't quite grasped, and then I haven't quite grasped yet. Like, okay, Henry also says, painting is a great mystery. No one has ever quite learned how to paint. No one has ever learned quite how to see. I'm like, ooh, that is so true. There's still frontier out there for us.
That's why it makes it fun.
Exactly. Said it well.
What are the Bibles that we should have in our library? So you've mentioned Robert Henry, the Art Spirit. Mm-hmm. What was the other one?
Hawthorne on painting.
Yeah, Hawthorne on painting. What else? Is there any others?
It's a good question. I was just reading Leonardo's notebooks, Da Vinci's notebooks. So, there's some old sources too that are interesting to go through. Mark Hansen told me about one that I've just started kind of diving into called Landscape into Art. Really good.
Landscape into Art.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of heady. Some of these books aren't that fun to read, but they give you vocabulary and they give you, give you perspective into history that's really good.
It's by Kenneth Clark.
I think Payne, Edgar Payne's book and John Carlson's book are both practical books. And so they're very popular right now. There's a lot of pictures. There's a lot of explanation of exactly how to paint clouds going back into the distance. There's explanations. And that's good because that was, that's knowledge that was missing that universities don't like to get into. They don't like to tell you how to do those things because what if you could invent something better? What if you could see better than Carlson did? So if you adopt those things as rules, then they tend to always be they become the ideal.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, those were the books that were recommended to me early on. I remember I went to a lecture and I asked an artist at that time. I didn't know about any of these things. And so that's what he mentioned. He mentioned Edgar Payne's composition book and Carlson's book on landscape painting. Yeah. And now since then, I've read those books, and while there's much to be learned in them, they're quite dense.
Yeah,
and so
they are.
Serendipitously, I found a book by Emil Gruppi, who was a student of Carlson, and I think in many respects he humanizes what Carlson was trying to say. That's not to minimize Carlson's principles, but he just made it more fun to learn and apply those principles. So yeah, I wouldn't limit myself to any one book for sure.
I get it. But you go out there and see. I mean, there was a William Merritt Chase painting at the Crystal Bridges Museum that broke all the rules of John Carlson, and it was so beautiful. I don't know how to describe it, but just the way he did the sky was all emotion. It looked like hurry, like he was like, oh crap, it's going to rain. He went blah, 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 and lost the shapes of the sky. Basically, he didn't have to have these perfect little shaped clouds going back into the distance. It was like, you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know, there are levels of understanding. Well, I don't think we really understand what makes a great painting. It isn't how perfectly you understand nature. That's one thing of maybe, 20 things that you could really consider. So. Well,
I mean, here's where my literal brain comes in. You mentioned that about nature, but much of art, there's no nature in it. Not nature in the way that I'm thinking, trees, landscapes, outside, animals, life. Mm-hmm. But I think of inanimate objects, still lifes, architectural. There's a lot of things there that go beyond just what's on the earth itself. So.
Anything that's visual, and air and space between you and the still life is nature. I guess everything is nature somewhat, but there's also imagination. There's the ideals that you have, that you hold, the values that you hold.
Well, I sure wish that I could avoid copyright infringement. And at that point where you say that, I would have Willy Wonka singing that song about imagination because I'd love it. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
There's so many things I would love to use and I can't. Because I'll get a copyright strike in a heartbeat. Sorry, I misled you there.
No.
You see what happens?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for a long time, history was an important part of art, wasn't it? I mean, I don't mean learning art history, but I mean like moments from history, historical painting.
John, we haven't even got into things like process and design and composition, drawing, tools and materials. But I gotta say, this has been, at least for me, and I hope it is for my audience, a refreshing conversation. Sometimes it's nice to do a deep dive into the why instead of the how when we talk about art.
And I'm better at talking about that anyway.
John, I've enjoyed having this conversation. There's so much more we could talk about. We may have to do a part 2 someday.
Well, that'd be great. I can't believe it. I've earned a part 2. That's the first time in my life.
You have earned a part 2. There's only one other part. No, I shouldn't say that on the show.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I really appreciate you being on The Artful Painter. It has been a delight to talk with you, and you've made me think about things that I find enjoyable and have learned from. So I appreciate it. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Carl. Been a real pleasure. It really has.
I really wish that some of you could just listen to the entire raw recording of some of these interviews that I do. John was a lot of fun to talk with. And what happens is a lot of times I end up cutting probably about 15 to 20 minutes out of each interview. It makes it cleaner. It's a little bit easier for you to digest. It's more on topic. But sometimes I go down big rabbit holes that have nothing to do with art. And it's a lot of fun. John was one of those guys that I just really enjoyed talking with. So I appreciate him taking the time to talk with me in this edition of The Artful Painter. Now, he is one of the artists that was invited to the Olmsted Plein Air Invitational this year. As part of their reimagining the Olmsted Invitational, they have created an online virtual gallery of this year's participating artists, which includes John Lasater and his work. The gallery is open through July 31st, 2020. You can view his submissions at olmstedpleinair.com. As usual, I have links in the show notes and the blog posts. Also, be sure to check out John Lasater's website. It's lasaterart.com. His blog posts are very, very thoughtful. I think you will enjoy reading his blog posts, and you can also peruse his gallery there of his artwork. As John mentioned in this episode, he has a great desire to teach and help artists grow. And part of that process is mentoring and providing critiques. Now, I recorded the interview that you just heard with John. It was a few weeks ago that it was recorded. Since then, he has launched a new online membership program that he calls Views. I will provide a link in the show notes and in the blog post. Right now, you have an opportunity to join as a founding member. It's a limited time. Hopefully you're hearing this in time that you could take part of that if you're interested. But he does admit it's kind of an idea in the raw. It's something that's going to be developed over time. But as you listen to John in this episode, you can sense that he has a lot to share. He's got this burning desire to share the lessons that he's learned and help you grow as an artist. So again, that link is in the show notes. Also, many of the books that we talked about, I'll provide links for that as well. It's time to share a little bit of feedback about the show. I appreciate everyone writing in. By the way, if you want to leave feedback, ask a question, make a comment, whatever, you can go to carlolson.tv/contact, and there's a form there that you can fill out, and that will forward an email to me, which I try to get to within 2 or 3 days or so. So anyway, that's how you can reach me. Now, this first email is from Totuus, and I know I'm probably mispronouncing your name, which reminds me, if you really want to help me out with your names, put a PS in your email and just show me phonetically how to pronounce your name so I can get it right. I really want to honor my guests, include not only the artists that I interview, but you when I read your feedback. So this one comes from Totuus. They say, thanks for the podcast. I have already learned a lot. I like that you are open-minded. I would hope more interviews with artists who are good at abstraction. Totuus, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate your comments. Yeah, I do appreciate abstract art. It is not my focus on this show. This show's bias is my bias, which is more toward the representational art, but I do appreciate abstraction. And to that end, I've featured at least 2 artists who have moved in that direction, Brian Rutenberg and Scott Gallatley of Gamblin' Artist Colors. So those are 2. And of course, many of the artists, if you note in their interviews, they too enjoy abstraction and sometimes seek abstraction within their representational art. But for now, the focus is primarily representational with some abstraction. But I appreciate that feedback. Thanks for listening. My next email is from Eugene of Australia. Eugene, I appreciate you writing in. In fact, he's written me 2 or 3 emails, one of which is very, very lengthy and more personal, so I won't get into that one. He says, I've listened to a few of the Artful Painter podcast and watched a number of your videos, and I want to thank you for them. I very much appreciate the wonderful sound quality. Well, thank you, Eugene. I appreciate you noticing that. Also, he says, have you thought about having the Artful Painter podcast transcribed? I listened to a half dozen Artful Painter podcasts yesterday and wanted to find a quote that was mentioned, but I didn't take note of it when I heard it, so I lost track of which podcast it was said. You might recall it was about being able to master the physical side of making paintings in months or something like that. Having a transcription of the podcast would help in finding quotes. I hear it helps in Google searches as well. And he mentions how a friend of his uses the software app Descript. Then he concludes the email with, thanks again for these podcasts, Eugene. Eugene, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your feedback. So the question is, have you thought about having the Artful Painter podcast transcribed? Yes, I have many times. I've been podcasting for about 10 years, and this question keeps coming up no matter which podcast I've worked on. Will you provide a transcript? So I appreciate it. It's something I wished I could provide. It is not viable at this time. It's costly. It's costly in money, and it's costly in time. It's just difficult to do. He mentions the use of a software app called Descript. I do have a subscription to Descript. I have experimented with it. In fact, I spent about 2 weeks ago well over 40 hours trying to edit a podcast in Descript, and it did not go well. The thing of it is that Descript says they have a 95% accuracy rate. Now, if you have a podcast that's an hour and 30 minutes of raw material, I have a track for myself, I have a track for my guest. So that means nearly 3 hours of transcription has to be done. Descript uses another transcription service called Rev, and it's very affordable, but again, the success rate is about 95%. The allure of Descript is it allows you to, in theory, edit a podcast or even a video as if you were in a word processor. I think that's a great idea. I would love to be able to do that. In practice, especially for long-form format shows like The Artful Painter, it is not practical. It just doesn't work. If I did a 10-minute video, yeah, it would work really well for that. But an hour and a half, no. An hour program, no. That 95% error rate translates to a huge, huge process in time. It's just a huge time sink because you've got to go in and correct it. And then Descript itself as an audio editor is buggy. It is not ready for prime time in my opinion. It's not quite there yet. I had numerous problems trying to output a decent file from it. So I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon. The only way transcription will become a part of this show is if this show got significant financial support. Right now, it is purely a labor of love. Well, I shouldn't say purely because I do have a handful of associate producers. And by the way, I want to acknowledge them: Colleen White, Alan Bloom, Jim McVicker, and Frank Wash. Now, if you would like to support this show, you can go to carlolson.tv/donate. If I get enough, maybe I will reconsider getting transcription services done. I did it several years ago. My first foray into it, it cost me nearly $200 per episode to hire it out, and the results were abysmal. You know, I would consider hiring it out again, but I'd have to have a lot of financial support to make that happen. That's why you don't see too many people doing this with long form podcasts like this one. There are some that do it, but their pockets are much deeper than mine. Anyway, it's a good suggestion, Eugene. I hope you take that the right way. I'm not shooting down your idea. I would love to have it because I have the same problem. There's over 50 hours of audio out there. And sometimes I will think back and say, oh man, I wish I could remember where blah, blah, blah was mentioned. And I forget even who said it. And so it would be nice to have that search feature. So I hope one day that I can fulfill your wish, because if I can fulfill your wish, I would also be fulfilling my wish as well. I think it would be great to have transcriptions. Well, again, I love hearing from everyone. If you want to send a note, send a question, make a comment, go to my website at carlolson.tv and click the contact tab and fill out the information. There's a lot more coming up in the Artful Painter. I can't wait to share future episodes. I've already got several recorded and I'm in the process of editing them. So prepare to be inspired and informed. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
Getting a picture on the TV.